Mr. President, it's very hard to believe that today marks exactly 2 months since I first came to the floor to advocate passage on the Senate's version of the Violence Against Women Act. I was very encouraged to see our body finally come together and eventually support this important legislation. The Violence Against Women Act has helped provide life-saving assistance to hundreds of thousands of women and their families, and it certainly was a no-brainer to make sure all women had access to that assistance. However, I was very disappointed to learn that a day after we passed it, the House Republicans pulled an immediate U-turn and introduced their version of the bill that would undo the common sense progress that we'd made. Mr. President, the House Republican version of VAWA is a giant step backward for victims of domestic violence. It is dangerous and irresponsible and leaves women across the country more vulnerable to domestic abuse. Not only do they remove important protections that would be created by the Senate version of the bill, they actually stripped existing protections already provided by this important law. In fact, it removed critical protections for LGBT victims. It does very little to address the epidemic of domestic and sexual violence in our tribal communities. It removed critical protections already in place for students on college campuses, and it rolled back protections for immigrant victims. Mr. President, we've made a lot of progress since VAWA was first passed back in 1994, and I hope no one will insist on putting partisan politics ahead of protecting victims of domestic violence. Where a person lives, who they love, what their citizenship status may be, should not determine whether or not their perpetrators are brought to justice. The Senate bill that we passed last month builds on what works in the current law. It improved what didn't. It continues on the path of reducing violence towards women, and it should not be controversial. Mr. President, it's time for the House Republicans to come to their senses, support our bipartisan bill so that women and families in this country can get the resources and support that they need.